Go in any pub, cafe, taxi, you name it, there are working people working full-time jobs, full-time hours in debt.
You've got a lot of members out on strike.
We have 70,000 members out on strike today across 150 universities over pay, pensions, but more importantly, workload and casualisation.
That's the same thing for the teachers as well, isn't it? It's where you overlap.
Yeah, there's an overlap in higher education, and I think people don't know this. There's 100,000 insecure contracts. So if you're a student, you are probably at some point being taught by someone who isn't being paid for the work that they're doing for you. So you're paying 9K, the person who's teaching you perhaps isn't being paid at all for answering emails and other stuff, and vice-chancellors, who are university bosses, are sat on £40 billion of reserves. So the sector isn't working for the vast majority of the people who live, teach, study within it.
And so a lot of these professors or people who work in universities, how are they faring with the cost of living crisis?
People aren't. I mean, people getting into debt, people are making ends meet, but the people on insecure contracts, the people who already were, at the breadline, they aren't surviving, and that's the point. So we keep hearing from the government that, people need to make things work. We already have members who aren't cooking hot meals because they can't afford the electricity. Do you know what I mean? People who are calling in sick because they can't afford the transport costs. We have members who sleep on library floors because they can't afford rent. This is a very real crisis, and I think people don't expect this in higher education, but it's a moral stain.
Your sector is also very interesting because it is privatised, a lot of it, which is sort of where people fear the NHS is going. Would you say that privatisation or outsourcing or anything that's gone on in universities has been beneficial?
No. There's been no form of outsourcing in universities that has been beneficial. From the cleaners, the caterers, the porters, the security staff, they're the people who, when you're 18 and you go to uni, they look after you. And outsourcing them has, consequences. Outsourcing teaching staff has consequences. And it's usually more expensive, and it's definitely not more efficient. And it erodes the sense of communities that is so important to universities.
Why would they want to do it then?
That's a very good question. I heard of one university where they outsourced all the cleaning staff, who were majority women, in order to close their gender pay gap.
Nice. I don't even know how to react to that. Nice. Well, looking more broadly at today, there's 500,000 people out on strike. This huge strike movement, this big cohesion, what does it say to you about the state of Britain?
It says a lot about the state of Britain. It says something that is quite depressing, but it says something that fills me with optimism. It's depressing that so many people are in such a desperate situation that they are actually voting in large numbers in a highly bureaucratic system to lose money, right? Which is what taking part in strike action means. But it's so energising because it also shows people are absolutely not having it. And the government can try as they might to pass legislation that they think is going to make it more complicated for people to take part in, campaigning, resisting and all the rest of it. And it's not happening. If anything, it's having the opposite effect. The public is getting more on board and more people are taking part in it. This is a government on the ropes. This is a government who doesn't care about the majority of British people and is lashing out at workers rather than actually deal with its own 13 years of failure.
You've actually got huge public support in a way I don't think that trade unions have experienced in quite a few years. What do you think that's down to?
Well, the thing is that working people who are supporting trade unions are working people. They're in trade unions, or they're mummies, or they're being mugged off at work. The reality of trade unionists, who are often presented as being outside of being normal people, is normal people. They are one and the same. And I just think the government are the kind of the weirdos that don't understand what's going on, not normal everyday people.
Do you say that they don't understand what's going on, or they just don't want to engage?
Well, I take it back. They do understand what's going on, actually. They understand very well. It's one of the reasons they're trying to bring in legislation to make it harder to take part in industrial action. The difference is that I think they're almost sort of missing a component, actually. The component that makes us compassionate, the component that makes people stand on picket lines, that special word, solidarity. I don't think they understand that. And I don't think they understand that people are willing to make short-term and sometimes longer-term sacrifices in the hope that we will get a better world. And I know for some people that will sound really misty-eyed, but I don't think they get that.
I mean, when we talk about solidarity and we talk about standing on the picket line, they sound like, words that are essentially very vital to the left, right? They sound like they come from the left of the field spectrum. But When you think about how these workers now can't afford to go out and, eat, they can't afford to go out and enjoy themselves or use the railways, I mean, how do you think that low pay affects the wider economy?
I do think it affects the wider economy. I think any attempt to make low pay seem like this fringe issue of people that are in trade unions is actually just not working if that's a strategy. If you go in any pub, cafe, taxi, you name it, there are working people working full-time jobs, full-time hours in debt. We've had an explosion of debt in the UK, which has ameliorated the impact of people not having enough money to pay for things. That is a big issue. So people may not think of certain groups as low paid, so we could talk about nurses, right? Some people say, well, £27,000 isn't a bad salary. It's like, well, if you live in London, your rent or your mortgage, your travel costs, that gets you very soon up to actually the amount that you are earning. So low pay is way more complicated than saying that's a good wage or not a good wage.
What's your message to striking workers today?
Keep at it. If it didn't work, they wouldn't be wanting to ban it.